My name is Ethan Cole, and I'm 32 years old. I live in a small town that most maps forget to label, tucked between hills that turn gold when summer hits, and fade into soft brown once autumn takes over. The kind of place where people know each other by last name first, where the grocery store closes early on Sundays, and where silence doesn't feel empty. It feels earned. I rent a modest apartment above an old upholstery shop. The stairs creak, the windows whistle when winter winds arrive, and the floorboards in my living room tilt just enough to make a coffee mug slide if I'm not careful. But it's home. Or maybe it's more accurate to say it's where I've learned to live with myself. I moved here 3 years ago, after life in the city wore me down in ways I didn't expect. I used to work in marketing, late hours, constant deadlines, a steady diet of caffeine and ambition. On paper, I was doing well, but paper can't measure emotional weight. I was tired, not the kind of tired that disappears after 8 hours of sleep, but the kind that sinks into your bones and lingers, like a story you never finish telling. Back then, I thought distance would fix everything, distance from noise, from expectations, from a version of myself I didn't like very much. I didn't plan on staying long when I first arrived. 1 month became 3, 3 became a year, and a year, well, here I still am. People often assume I'm running from something. Maybe they're right, but I've never confirmed it. Some memories are easier to carry quietly, like stones kept in a jacket pocket, weighty enough to feel, but small enough not to slow you down too much. My days follow a rhythm now, one I've grown comfortable with. I work at a local community center, helping organize programs, events, and weekend gatherings. It's not glamorous work, but it's honest, and I've learned that honesty matters more to me than I ever realized. Most mornings start the same way. I wake before the sun rises, pull on a sweater, and sit on the fire escape outside my kitchen window with a cup of coffee. I watch dawn stretch itself across the sky, slowly, softly, turning the horizon into watercolor. Steam drifts from the mug, the metal railing chills my fingers, and somewhere in the distance, a dog starts barking like it does every single morning at exactly the same time. I should find another spot to sit, but habits are strange things. They anchor you even when nothing else does. I think about my parents sometimes. My father passed away when I was in college, quietly in his sleep. My mother followed 5 years later, though her body kept moving for months afterward. I've always believed grief doesn't break people quickly. It erodes them slowly, the way waves reshape cliffs. I carry both of them with me, not as shadows, but as soft echoes. Would they be proud of me? I don't know. But I hope so. Relationships, that's a subject people tread carefully around when they talk to me. I had one that mattered years ago. Some endings are dramatic, doors slammed, voices raised. Ours wasn't. It just dissolved, like sugar in warm water, present one moment, invisible the next. We loved each other, but timing didn't love us back. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if we'd met later, or sooner, or been different versions of ourselves. Then I remind myself that what if doesn't change where we stand. It only changes how long we stand staring at the past. Since then, I've learned to sit with silence. Silence can be heavy, but it can also be gentle, like a blanket you wrap around yourself when the world feels too loud. I don't have many close friends here, but the ones I have are steady, like warm lamps glowing on quiet streets. Mia runs the bakery across from my building. She always adds an extra pastry to my order when she thinks I'm having a bad day. Tom, who fixes old cars, knows I don't like talking about certain things, so he just hands me a wrench and lets the engine noise do the comforting. Small gestures, but small gestures hold people together more tightly than grand declarations ever could. Sometimes, after work, I walk by the river that cuts through the edge of town. The water is slow there, as if even nature decided this was a place to rest. I sit on a worn wooden bench, listen to wind moving through tall grass, and let thoughts drift without trying to control them. The sun lowers itself behind the hills around that time, painting everything in amber light. Those moments are when I feel closest to myself, when I'm not performing for the world, just existing in it. I didn't expect anything to change, not urgently, not dramatically, not in a way that would reshape the quiet balance I'd spent years building. I believe my life had settled, like dust after a long journey. I didn't feel the need to search for anything anymore. Not love, not new beginnings, not second chances. I told myself I was content, and sometimes I even believed it. But life has a way of stirring the stillness, not through storms or shouts, but through gentle taps on the shoulder. A new face, a soft voice, a moment you didn't anticipate. I remember one evening in particular, late summer, warm air, the smell of fresh rain still lingering from a passing storm. I was closing up the community center after a small event, stacking chairs and sweeping crumbs. Outside, the street lamps flickered on one by one, their light blurring slightly through damp air. I paused at the window and looked out at the town, the way everything slowed down at night, the way people carried themselves, like they were moving through a dream. I didn't know it yet, but the days ahead would shift something in me, not violently, not suddenly, but steadily, like a tide that draws closer each day until your feet are in the water before you even notice. Back then, if someone had asked me what I hoped for, I don't think I could have answered clearly. I wasn't looking for love or connection or meaning. I wasn't searching for someone to fill a void. I'd learned to live with empty spaces. What I truly wanted, though I didn't yet realize it, was to feel seen again. Not admired, not chased, just seen. Sometimes I wonder if that's what we all want, beneath the layers we carry, for someone to notice the small things we try not to mention, the way we hesitate before speaking, the scars we don't name, the softness we protect, because we're afraid it will disappear if we expose it to the world. I didn't know that someone was already moving toward me in her own quiet way, carrying a story heavier than I could have imagined, and wearing a ring I would come to notice before anything else. But that's later. For now, this was my life, steady, hushed, waiting for something I couldn't name. And in those days before I knew her story, I believed the calm would last forever. I first saw her on a Thursday afternoon, though if you asked her, she'd probably say it was Wednesday. Time plays tricks when life is quiet. Days echo each other until they blur. But I remember that Thursday because something small shifted inside me, like a curtain being drawn open just enough to let a sliver of light through. I was arranging flyers on the bulletin board in the community center lobby, pressing thumbtacks into cork while trying not to think too much about how tired I felt. Outside, the afternoon sun hung low, turning the windows into mirrors. That was when the door opened and she stepped inside. She didn't enter dramatically, no gust of wind, no hurried footsteps. She just arrived, softly, like a thought you didn't realize you'd been waiting for. Her voice was the first thing I noticed, warm, but carrying something quiet beneath it, like someone who had learned to speak gently so nothing precious would break. She asked if the center still needed volunteers for weekend events. Her hands folded loosely in front of her bag strap resting on her shoulder, as if she carried just enough weight to stay balanced. Her name was Lena. She said it simply, without expecting recognition, but her name lingered in the air a little longer than I expected. I introduced myself and offered a small smile that I hoped didn't look forced. She smiled back, slowly, as if deciding whether or not the moment deserved warmth. And I felt something settle in my chest, like a knot loosening without permission. I didn't notice the ring then, not at first. What I noticed was the way she listened, eyes steady, shoulders relaxed, presence unhurried. People rush through conversations these days, waiting for their turn to speak, but she didn't. She listened as though every word carried weight. We talked briefly, nothing extraordinary. Schedules, event needs, what kind of help we were looking for. I showed her the storage room, the supply closet, the sign-in sheets. She nodded thoughtfully at everything, committing details to memory without needing to repeat them aloud. There was a calmness about her that made the space around us feel softer, quieter, as if her presence absorbed noise instead of adding to it. Only when she reached into her bag for a pen did I see it. A thin gold ring, simple, no diamonds, no ornate design, just a warm band of metal catching the light. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't new, it just existed with the kind of permanence that made my breath pause for a moment. She didn't fidget with it or hide it. She wore it naturally, as though she'd forgotten it was there. My eyes lingered half a second longer than they should have, and I looked away before she noticed. But something had already shifted inside me, like a tiny question knocking softly, asking to be heard. I didn't ask anything, of course. Curiosity and respect wrestled quietly in my mind, and respect won. Some stories are not invitations, their doors left gently closed. Still, as she filled out the volunteer form, her handwriting neat and deliberate, I caught myself wondering who waited at home for her, who held her heart, who she returned to at the end of the day. Was she happy? Was she in love? Did she choose the ring, or did the ring choose her? But questions like that aren't things you voice to strangers, not when life has taught you how delicate people can be. She handed me the form with a soft, "Here you go," and when our fingers brushed by accident, it was like touching the surface of still water. Nothing dramatic, just a gentle ripple that spread a little farther than expected. After she left, I stood in the lobby longer than necessary, staring at the door she'd walked through, noticing the faint scent of something floral lingering in the hallway. I couldn't place it, lavender maybe, or something lighter, like jasmine after rain. Whatever it was, it stayed in the air, and I found myself breathing in a little deeper than usual. The next afternoon, she returned early for her first volunteer shift. I was wiping down tables when I heard her voice again, polite, soft, with that same unhurried rhythm. She carried a tray of homemade cookies, wrapped neatly in wax paper, and placed them in the staff room as though it was an ordinary gesture. People like her make small kindness feel effortless. As we worked side by side, moving chairs, sorting donation boxes, we didn't talk about love or pasts or anything that might reveal too much too soon. But conversations have layers, and silence fills spaces words can't reach. I learned she loved reading, but rarely finished books lately. I learned she liked tea more than coffee, but coffee more than sleep. I learned she took long walks at night and stopped to look at the moon, even when clouds covered most of it. I didn't learn anything about the ring, but I didn't forget it either. Sometimes, when she reached for a stack of papers or pushed her hair behind her ear, the sleeve of her sweater would slide just enough to reveal the band again. It wasn't the ring itself that stirred something in me. It was the contradiction between what I saw and what I felt. She didn't carry herself like someone tethered to a promise. Her laughter came easily, but rarely. Her eyes held warmth, but also distance. She seemed present in every moment, yet somewhere else entirely. It made me wonder, can someone be held by love and haunted by it at the same time? By the end of that shift, we'd shared a comfortable rhythm, working without overthinking, pausing without discomfort. When the day ended, she slipped her bag onto her shoulder and said, "Thank you for showing me around this week." I nodded, trying not to sound too sincere when I replied, "I'm glad you're here." She smiled again, that same careful smile, like she was offering something real, but not everything. As she walked toward the exit, the evening light through the door frame turned her silhouette into a soft outline. Just before stepping outside, she hesitated. Not long, barely noticeable, almost as if she were deciding whether to say something more. But she didn't. She simply whispered, "See you tomorrow," and disappeared into the calm dusk. I stayed inside longer than necessary again. That night, as I sat on my fire escape with a lukewarm cup of coffee, I replayed our conversations, not searching for deeper meaning, just remembering the sound of her voice, the ease of her presence. I told myself the ring was none of my concern, and maybe that was true. But truth doesn't always match feeling. The town lights glimmered below, cars hummed softly in the distance, and the world felt balanced in a way I hadn't experienced for a long time. I leaned back against the brick wall, closing my eyes, listening to the kind of quiet that only comes when day releases its grip. That's when it happened. Not a sudden realization, not a confession, nothing dramatic. Just a single thought rising slowly, gently, like a tide edging close enough to touch your feet. I wanted to understand the silence behind her eyes, and somewhere beneath that feeling was another, quieter, more fragile. I hoped I would have the patience to wait until she trusted me with it, but emotions like that don't need to be spoken. Not yet. For now, all I knew was this. I had noticed her ring, and I couldn't stop wondering why nothing else about her felt taken. I didn't plan on seeing Lena as often as I did, but some things unfold without permission. Her volunteer days gradually became more frequent, not because we asked her to, but because she lingered, offering help before anyone remembered we needed it. She blended into the rhythm of the community center the way a melody settles into a familiar song, subtle at first, then impossible to imagine missing. Most days began quietly. She would arrive early, a warm travel mug in hand, steam rising faintly as if sharing her breath with the chilly morning air. Sometimes she brought an extra mug and set it on the counter beside me without a word. She never said why, and I never asked. Accepting a kindness can feel heavier than offering one. Outside of work, we didn't make plans, not formally, but somehow we found ourselves walking the same streets when dusk settled in. It started with coincidence, or what we told ourselves was coincidence. The town was small, paths cross easily, but coincidence only explains the first few times. After that, it becomes something else, an unspoken choice neither person wants to interrupt by naming. Our conversations were steady, never rushed. She asked questions deliberately, gently, as if trying to understand me without peeling back layers too quickly. She never looked away when I spoke, but she didn't stare either. Her attention was balanced, present, but never possessive. One evening, we walked along the riverbank, gravel crunching beneath our shoes. The sky was painted in late spring pastels, lavender merging into rose gold, and the air smelled faintly of earth after light rain. She talked about favorite childhood books and the stories she wished she'd written. I told her about my father's quiet strength and my mother's laughter that filled rooms long after she left them. At one point, we stopped to watch the water drift beneath an old wooden bridge. Lena leaned against the railing, her hair brushing her cheek. Without thinking, I rested my arms beside hers, not touching, just close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from her sleeve. She didn't move away. She didn't move closer. She stayed still, as if the moment was enough. I noticed her ring again when she reached up to tuck her hair behind her ear. The fading sunlight caught it at an angle that made it glow faintly, soft gold against soft skin. It didn't look shiny or new. Instead, it felt lived in, as though it had been carried through years, weathering stories no one spoke aloud. The ring should have drawn boundaries, lines I wasn't supposed to cross. But boundaries only hold when both hearts agree to honor them. And my heart was slipping. I tried to silence my curiosity, but quiet feelings still whisper, and whispers are loud when the world around you grows gentle. I wondered how someone could carry a ring and yet walk as though longing sat softly in her chest. I wondered if she missed someone, or if the ring was a reminder to herself more than a message to others. But none of these thoughts ever reached my lips. Some questions are too heavy to ask without changing everything. As days passed, the silence between us deepened. Not an uncomfortable silence, but the kind that lets two people breathe at the same rhythm. Sometimes we shared stories. Other times we shared nothing but presence. And presence, when offered sincerely, is its own kind of confession. We began eating lunch together in the staff room, sitting across from each other at the small wooden table scarred with old pen marks. I learned she preferred savory over sweet, that she cut her sandwiches neatly down the middle, that she wiped her fingers on a cloth napkin instead of paper because she didn't like the feeling of waste. She learned that I didn't drink tea unless someone else made it, that I read poetry late at night but rarely admitted it, that I hummed quietly under my breath when I was concentrating. Small details, maybe, but intimacy is built from small details, not declarations. One afternoon, as we sorted donation boxes, her hand brushed mine accidentally. The touch was brief, feather-light, but it lingered longer in my chest than on my skin. She froze for a heartbeat, as though she didn't expect the moment either, then slowly pulled her hand back. Not abruptly, not guiltily, just gently, like someone recovering balance. Our eyes met. Not dramatically, no sparks, no sudden rush. Just a quiet understanding neither of us named. I noticed her ring again that day, looser than before, turning slightly on her finger as she worked. It looked old, but not fragile, worn, but not neglected, as though it had carried weight at one time, but that weight had shifted, leaving echoes instead of certainty. I wondered if she ever took it off. I wondered if she wanted to. I didn't dare ask. Some evenings we sat at a small cafe near the town square. She ordered chamomile tea. I ordered black coffee. We didn't talk about the future, not hers, not mine. Instead, we talked about quiet things. The way autumn reshapes the world, how loneliness can feel like a closed window on a warm day. The comfort of rereading books whose endings we already know. She once asked me, "Do you think love changes us more when we find it, or when we lose it?" I didn't answer immediately. I watched her instead, the way her eyes lowered, as though bracing for a truth she feared. I could have said something clever. I could have said something safe. But instead, I whispered, "Both. I think love changes us both ways." She nodded slowly, and I saw her fingers brush the ring, not intentionally, not as a habit, but reflexively, like someone touching the memory of a wound they have learned to live with. She shifted slightly in her seat. "Sometimes," she said softly, "the hardest part isn't losing someone. It's learning how to carry what they left behind." Her voice didn't crack, her eyes didn't well up, yet something in her tone felt like an ocean held back by steady hands. I wanted to ask the question resting at the edge of my lips. Who did you lose? But silence is a kind of respect too. So, I said nothing. Our routine continued, not defined, not promised, not labeled, just shared. Sometimes I caught her staring across rooms, lost in thoughts I couldn't reach. I didn't interrupt. People deserve spaces to feel what they feel. Other times she laughed, lightly, almost shyly, and her laughter loosened something in me I didn't know was tight. But every time her fingers curled around that ring, a quiet ache stirred in my chest. Not jealousy, something gentler, something like longing for clarity. I wanted to understand her, not claim her. I wanted to know the story she carried, not to fix it, but to respect it. Yet we were still two people moving around a truth we weren't ready to touch. Something in our connection felt balanced on a fragile thread, steady as long as we didn't pull. We didn't name what was forming between us, and that unspoken restraint made every shared moment feel both safe and precarious. I began noticing things I shouldn't have cared about. How she tucked her scarf closer when she was cold, how she paused half a second before expressing gratitude as if the words held weight, how her gaze dropped whenever conversations edged too close to heartache. And the ring, that simple gold ring, rested on her finger like a story paused mid-sentence. I found myself wondering, is love always defined by what we keep, or by what we can't let go of? I didn't know the answer yet, neither did she, but the space between us held the question gently, like a bird cupped in open hands. Whatever truth lived behind that ring was still hers alone, locked quietly in her past, carried softly in her present, shaping the way she breathed and the way she hesitated, before stepping toward anything that resembled closeness. I didn't push, I didn't pull away. I simply stayed, hoping time would earn trust where questions could not. Because something told me this much. Some stories are not meant to be forced open. They unfold when hearts finally feel safe to speak. And though the truth between us wasn't spoken yet, I felt it lingering like dawn before sunrise, soft, patient, inevitable. There are moments in life that don't announce themselves. They don't arrive with lightning or thunder. They slip quietly into the spaces we leave unguarded, and by the time we realize their importance, they've already settled into memory. For me, one of those moments began on a cold evening in late autumn. The sun had set early, as it tends to when the year leans toward winter, and the wind carried a chill sharp enough to make breath visible. I was closing the community center alone. Most volunteers had left early, eager to escape the dropping temperature. Lena stayed behind without being asked, helping fold tables and stack chairs with her familiar, unhurried patience. We worked mostly in silence. There wasn't much to say. Our movements synced by routine, our comfort in each other's presence no longer surprising. I'd grown used to her nearness, the way she filled a room with warmth, simply by doing small things carefully. When we finished, I walked her to her car out of habit, not intention. The parking lot lights flickered overhead, casting halos on the damp pavement. Frost whispered along the edges of the grass. Our breath rose and dissolved into the cold air, vanishing before either of us could see where it went. She leaned against her car door, not opening it yet, as though she wasn't ready to leave. Her hands were tucked into her coat pockets, shoulders slightly hunched. I could sense something lingering, an emotion hovering close enough to feel, but not close enough to name. "You okay?" I asked softly, the words slipping out before I could weigh them. She inhaled, slow. "I'm tired," she said. Not physically, not in a way sleep could cure. Her tone carried depth, worn edges, quiet ache. I nodded, not pushing. Silence felt safer than pressing for details that weren't ready to emerge. Wind rustled fallen leaves around our feet. The quiet between us wasn't awkward. It was expectant, like a pause in a story before the next. Page turns. She shifted slightly, lifting one hand from her pocket. The ring glinted under the overhead light, soft gold catching on shadows. But this time, instead of letting the moment pass, she looked at her hand with an expression I hadn't seen before. Not longing, not pain, something gentler, like the fragile acceptance that comes after grief softens into memory. Her thumb brushed the ring once, slowly. When she spoke, her voice was steady, but quieter than usual, like someone opening a door that hadn't been opened in a long time. "You've noticed it," she said. My breath caught, not in surprise, but in recognition. I half smiled, half winced. "I have," I replied. But I didn't want to assume anything, or ask too soon. She exhaled, and I watched the mist of her breath swirl into the air, disappearing like something unfinished. "That's why I feel like I can tell you," she whispered. She wasn't looking at me then. Her gaze was fixed on the ring on the hand that wore it. I didn't move closer, I didn't reach out. I just stayed still, allowing her space to speak without interruption. After a moment that stretched but didn't strain, she said 4 words that felt both familiar and new, words spoken slowly, as if placing them gently into the world. It was never for him. Her voice didn't tremble. Mine almost did. I didn't ask who, because somehow the question felt too small, too narrow for what she was sharing. Instead, I waited. Sometimes silence makes room for truths words would otherwise rush past. She turned the ring gently on her finger. "It was a promise," she continued quietly. "Not to someone I married, not to someone who asked for my hand. It was a promise to someone I was supposed to build a life with, someone I never got to." Her eyes lifted toward me then, not seeking pity, not asking to be held together, just sharing truth, piece by piece, as though letting each sentence breathe before offering the next. "We were young," she said, "not reckless, just hopeful. We talked about futures before we understood what the future could take away. We didn't have timelines or plans set in stone. We just had love, the kind that didn't need explaining. Her hand paused on the ring, still, gentle, reverent. But life has its own timing, she whispered, and sometimes it pulls people apart before either person is ready. She didn't cry, she didn't break. She spoke like someone who had cried once, long enough, deeply enough, and gently stitched herself back together afterward. I swallowed, feeling the weight of her words settle into me, not heavy, but grounding. "So you kept the ring," I said softly, finishing the unspoken thought. Her nod was slow. "Yes, I kept it because it reminds me of who I was when love didn't scare me, and who I still want to be someday." There was no drama in her confession, no theatrics, just truth, the kind wrapped in tenderness rather than pain. I allowed a moment to pass, long enough for her to breathe, long enough for me to honor the space she'd opened. "I'm glad you told me," I said quietly. She looked at me then, really looked at me, eyes steady, searching not for answers, but for understanding. And in that gaze, I felt something shift, not a door opening, not a wall falling, but a window quietly unlatched to let fresh air in. Her shoulders eased, as if speaking the truth aloud, lightened a weight she'd learned to carry without complaint. "There's one more thing," she murmured, voice barely above the wind. I held her gaze. "Only if you want to share." She nodded, and her breath wavered the slightest bit. "I wear it because I'm waiting for my heart to catch up with my life. I'm not holding on to him anymore. I'm holding on to what loving someone once taught me. And I don't ever want to forget that I'm capable of feeling that deeply again. Not a promise, not a declaration, not a hint. Just honesty." I felt warmth rise in my chest, not passion, not longing, nothing rushed, just a quiet respect for the way she held herself, strong yet soft. We stood together for a moment, letting everything settle. The wind brushed past, leaves whispered along the pavement. Somewhere in the distance, a car door closed, life going on as if nothing monumental had occurred. But for me, something had. I didn't reach for her hand. I didn't ask for anything more. I simply said, in a voice I barely recognized as my own, "You don't have to rush your heart. I'll walk at your pace." Her eyes softened. Just a little, just enough. "I know," she whispered. And for the first time, I believe she truly did. When we finally said goodnight, she opened her car door but lingered for a moment longer. Her fingers brushed the ring once more, but this time, the touch felt different. Not like grief, not like longing, like acknowledgement. A quiet reminder of where she'd been, and where she might allow herself to go someday. As her taillights disappeared into the night, I stood alone in the empty parking lot, my breath clouding the chilled air. I didn't feel the urge to chase her or confess anything. I just felt present. And in the stillness of that moment, I realized something simple. The ring was not a barrier. It was a story. And stories don't end just because someone else stops writing. Some wait, patiently, for a new chapter. After that night in the parking lot, something subtle shifted between us. Nothing dramatic, no sudden rush into romance, no declarations under streetlights. We still showed up at the community center. We still stacked chairs, folded tables, and handed out forms. We still walked along the river and sat in quiet cafes. But now there was a quiet honesty resting between us, a truth neither of us pretended not to see. I didn't look at her, ring the same way anymore. It was no longer a question. It was an answer. Not an answer about whether she was free or taken or available in the way people like to categorize others. It was an answer about who she was, someone who had loved deeply, someone who had lost, someone who refused to let that loss erase the part of her that could still love again. Knowing that didn't make anything simpler, but it made everything clearer. Our days continued, as days do, stitched together by routine and small moments that might have looked ordinary from the outside, but on the inside, they felt different. Some mornings, she arrived with that same travel mug and an extra one for me. The first time after her confession, she placed it on the counter and looked at me as if she were checking whether I would treat her differently now. I didn't. "Thank you," I said, like I always did. Only this time, I let my gratitude linger a little longer in my eyes. She seemed to notice. A small, almost invisible smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. When we worked together, we didn't avoid what she had shared. We just didn't circle around it. There was no need to. Truth doesn't always demand to be discussed once it's been spoken. It just asks to be respected. Sometimes we mentioned him indirectly, without using his name. "He loved the rain," she said once, as we watched a drizzle blur the view through the lobby windows. "He said it made the world honest. No one could pretend they weren't affected by it." I looked at her reflection in the glass more than the street outside. "Do you like it?" I asked. Her shoulders lifted in a small shrug. "I've learned to," she replied. Other times, we didn't speak of the past at all. We talked instead about small things that filled the present. New books neither of us had time to finish. Recipes that went wrong in funny ways. How the town's old traffic light blinked on and off some nights like it. Couldn't decide if it still had a job to do. Life threaded itself through those conversations. Soft, unhurried, real. One Sunday afternoon, we ended up at the river again, our familiar place. The air was cool but not cold, the kind of temperature that made sweaters feel right and the world feel in between seasons. Leaves drifted lazily on the surface of the water, and the sky was a gentle gray that made colors on the ground seem richer. We sat on the same bench side by side, not facing each other, but facing forward, toward the slow-moving water, the crooked branches, the distant sound of children playing further up the path. She had her hands folded loosely in her lap. The ring was visible, but for once, I didn't feel its presence first. I felt hers. "Do you ever think about the version of yourself you used to be?" she asked quietly, "and wonder if they'd recognize who you are now?" Her question was calm, not loaded. A thought she was releasing into the open air. I took a breath. "Sometimes," I said, "I think younger me would be surprised by how quiet my life is now. But I also think he'd be relieved that I finally stopped pretending I was okay when I wasn't." She nodded, eyes on the water. "I think younger me would be mad at me," she said with a soft exhale, "for being afraid, for hesitating, for holding back." "Do you think you're holding back?" I asked gently. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she turned the ring slowly, once around her finger, then let it rest. "I think I've been living in the space between letting go and moving on," she said. "Not stuck, just cautious. I promised myself I wouldn't give my heart to someone who didn't feel like home. And for a long time, that promise felt like a closed door." She paused, then added, almost under her breath, "It doesn't feel as closed anymore." The words were simple, but they landed inside me like a lantern being lit in a dim room. I didn't grab them, didn't twist them into something bigger. I just let them glow quietly where they wanted to. We sat there for a while, saying nothing. Words would have made the moment heavier than it needed to be. Eventually I asked, "Do you think you'll ever take it off?" Her gaze dropped to the ring. She didn't look sad, only thoughtful. "I used to think I had to," she said. "That I needed to take it off to prove something to myself, to prove I'd healed, to prove I was ready to let someone new in." "And now?" I asked. "Now." She exhaled, a fragile smile appearing and fading on her lips. "Now I think healing isn't about erasing what was there. It's about changing what it means." She rubbed her thumb gently over the gold band. "If I ever take it off, I want it to be because it's become a memory I can carry without wearing, not because I'm trying to convince myself of something." I let her words settle. "I think that makes sense," I said. "You get to decide what it means, not the world, not the past, just you." She glanced at me then, warmth in her eyes that hadn't been there those first few weeks we'd known each other. "And you?" she asked. "What are you still wearing that you haven't named yet?" The question caught me off guard, but in a way that felt right. I thought of my own past, the relationship that had faded, the career I'd walked away from, the unspoken guilt of not being there with my mother as much as I wanted during her last months. I didn't have a ring or an object to show for those things, but I carried them anyway. "I think I wear my life like a jacket that doesn't quite fit," I said slowly. "Comfortable enough to keep, but not tailored enough to feel like it was really made for me. I'm still figuring out how to grow into myself without apologizing for who I used to be." She smiled, soft, genuine. "That sounds like an honest place to be," she replied. And somehow, sitting there beside her, with the river moving gently before us, I didn't feel as unfinished as I usually did. Time didn't rush us after that. We didn't start counting days or labeling what we were. We simply kept showing up. Some evenings, we were nothing more than two people sharing tea and conversation at a worn wooden table. Other evenings, our hands rested closer on the bench, almost, but not quite touching. And the distance didn't feel empty. It felt intentional. A respectful pause in a song that hadn't quite reached its chorus. Slowly, I noticed small changes. She still wore the ring, but sometimes when she talked, her fingers moved more freely, no longer circling it as if it were an anchor. She laughed a little more often and a little less carefully. Her eyes didn't drift as far away when we talked about future plans. One day, after a long volunteering shift, we sat in the staff room, both too tired to move. She had taken off her coat and placed it on the back of the chair. As she absent-mindedly rubbed her hands together to warm them, I noticed something different. The ring wasn't on her finger. It lay instead on a delicate chain around her neck, the gold resting gently against her collarbone. I didn't say anything, neither did she. But at some point she caught me looking, just briefly, and there was no panic in her eyes, no rush to explain, just a quiet understanding. She lifted a hand, touched the small ring where it lay over her heart, and said, "Some things feel better closer to where they began." I nodded, not as someone demanding an explanation, but as someone honored to witness the shift. I didn't need to know whether she'd wear it on her hand again someday or not. What mattered was that she was letting its meaning evolve instead of letting it define her. People often think love is about grand gestures, big declarations, fireworks lighting up the sky. Maybe sometimes it is. But as I sat there with Lena, sharing tired smiles and quiet air, I realized something else. Love is also in the way we sit with each other's stories, without rushing them, without rewriting them, without demanding they be shorter or neater or easier to hold. I don't know what label anyone else would put on what we became. Friends, something more, something in between. What I know is this: I stopped feeling invisible. She stopped feeling like her heart was stuck in a chapter she couldn't leave. We both learned that moving forward doesn't mean abandoning what came before. It means carrying it differently. There will probably come a day when we look back at this time and see it more clearly than we do now. Maybe we'll be sitting at the same cafe table, older, laughing about how careful we were with each other at the beginning. Maybe we'll be in different cities, different lives, grateful for having met at all. I don't know. What I do know is that there is a quiet courage in allowing someone close when your heart has been broken before, and an equal courage in taking slow steps instead of rushing into something just because the world says you should. I saw her wedding ring. She told me it was never for him. But now, when I see it resting against her skin, I don't see a symbol of a love that never reached its future. I see a woman who chose to honor her past without letting it own her present. I see a person who taught me that healing isn't loud, it's gentle, patient, and often shared in silence with someone who chooses to stay. And somewhere in that shared silence, in those evening walks, in the way her eyes soften when she looks at me now, I've started to believe something I wasn't sure of before. We don't always get the love story we expected, But sometimes we get the one that quietly teaches us how to live with our whole heart again. We don't always get the love story we expected, but sometimes we get the one that quietly teaches us how to live with our whole heart again. Perfect spot to softly invite listeners to share their own experiences or stay for more stories without breaking the bedtime mood.